June 16, 2020, 10:33 p.m. 16-year-old Lily Hartwell had been missing for just over 30 hours when her mother's phone rang. The call came from a number no one recognized. At first, detectives assumed it would be another tip, another rumor, another false lead from someone who thought they had seen Lily somewhere along the highways outside Cedar Ridge, Colorado. But the moment Lily's mother answered, the room went silent. A calm voice on the other end said only 6 words: "She's safe. Stop looking for her." Then the line went dead. At the time, investigators believed the message meant exactly what it sounded like: a cruel prank. Someone exploiting a desperate family during the most terrifying hours of their lives. But buried inside that 11-second call was something no one noticed. Not the detectives standing in the living room. Not the FBI agent monitoring the line. Not even the audio technician who archived the recording that night. Because while everyone focused on the words, they missed something else. Something hiding underneath the voice. A detail so small it would sit unnoticed for months. Until one detective replayed the call again and realized the voice wasn't the most important sound on that recording. Something else was there. Something that made his blood run cold. June 16, 2020, 10:33 p.m. 16-year-old Lily Hartwell had been missing for just over 30 hours when her mother's phone rang. The call came from a number no one recognized. At first, detectives assumed it would be another tip, another rumor, another false lead from someone who thought they had seen Lily somewhere along the highways outside Cedar Ridge, Colorado. But the moment Lily's mother answered, the room went silent. A calm voice on the other end said only 6 words: "She's safe. Stop looking for her." Then the line went dead. At the time, investigators believed the message meant exactly what it sounded like: a cruel prank. Someone exploiting a desperate family during the most terrifying hours of their lives. But buried inside that 11-second call was something no one noticed. Not the detectives standing in the living room. Not the FBI agent monitoring the line. Not even the audio technician who archived the recording that night. Because while everyone focused on the words, they missed something else. Something hiding underneath the voice. A detail so small it would sit unnoticed for months. Until one detective replayed the call again and realized the voice wasn't the most important sound on that recording. Something else was there. Something that made his blood run cold. But to understand why that call mattered, you have to understand who Lily Hartwell was. Cedar Ridge, Colorado, is the kind of town where people still leave their doors unlocked. It sits between long stretches of pine forest and quiet 2-lane roads that wind through the foothills. With just over 8,000 residents, everyone seems to know everyone else. And Lily Hartwell was exactly the kind of teenager people trusted. She was 16 years old, a junior at Cedar Ridge High School. Teachers described her as focused, thoughtful, and unusually responsible for her age. She ran cross-country in the fall and volunteered at the town's small animal rescue on weekends. Her friends said she was the one who always remembered birthdays, always checked in when someone was having a bad day. Nothing about Lily suggested risk-taking or rebellion. In fact, the people who knew her best said the same thing. Lily didn't disappear. That simply wasn't the kind of girl she was. Her mother, Rebecca Hartwell, had raised Lily alone since Lily was 7 years old. They lived in a modest blue house on Willow Street, a quiet neighborhood filled with maple trees and bicycles leaning against front porches. Their life was simple but steady. Rebecca worked as a nurse at Cedar Ridge Community Hospital, often taking night shifts. Lily had grown used to the routine: homework at the kitchen table, dinner left in the fridge, text messages that said things like "don't forget to lock the door." But despite Rebecca's long hours, Friends often said the two were incredibly close. They talked every day, sometimes about school, sometimes about Lily's dream of becoming a veterinarian, and sometimes about nothing important at all, which is why the last normal conversation they shared now feels almost haunting. It was Sunday afternoon, June 14th. Rebecca had just left for an overnight shift at the hospital. Before walking out the door, she asked the same question she always asked. "You good for tonight?" Lily nodded from the couch, her laptop open in front of her. "Yeah, I'm finishing my biology project." Rebecca told her she'd be home around 7 the next morning. Then she left. Security cameras from a neighbor's house show Rebecca's car pulling away from Willow Street at 4:52 p.m. Inside the house, Lily continued her evening exactly the way she usually did. Her phone activity later confirmed she spent the next hour messaging two friends about school assignments and an upcoming cross-country practice. At 6:11 p.m., she posted a photo to Instagram, a picture of her dog Murphy, asleep on the living room rug. The caption simply said, "Lazy Sunday." Nothing about that moment suggested it would be the last normal thing anyone would see from Lily Hartwell. But this is where things start to shift. At 7:04 p.m., Lily received a phone call. It lasted 32 seconds. Investigators would later confirm the number belonged to someone Lily knew. But at the time, no one saw it as important, because the person on the other end of that call had been part of Lily's life for years. After that call, Lily's behavior changes in small but noticeable ways. At 7:18 p.m., she sends a text to her friend Maya. "Be right back. Going out for a few minutes." That message would later confuse everyone who read it, because Lily almost never went anywhere alone at night. Not without telling her mother. Not without a reason. But that evening, something convinced her to step outside. And, according to the last piece of footage investigators would eventually find, Lily leaves the house at exactly 7:26 p.m. She steps onto the front porch wearing a gray hoodie, black running shorts, and white sneakers. Murphy, the family dog, briefly follows her to the doorway. Then Lily gently pushes him back inside. The door closes. The porch light flickers on automatically, and Lily Hartwell walks down the driveway toward Willow Street. At first, nothing about the footage looks unusual. She doesn't appear scared. She doesn't appear rushed. In fact, she looks completely calm, almost as if she expects to be gone only a few minutes. But there's one detail investigators would later struggle to explain, because just before Lily reaches the end of the driveway, she stops. She looks down the street, and she raises her hand, not to wave, but as if signaling to someone already waiting in the dark. Then Lily walks out of frame, and she is never seen again. By the time Rebecca Hartwell returned home the next morning, the house felt wrong. Murphy was barking nonstop. Lily's bedroom door was open. Her phone charger sat plugged into the wall, but the phone itself was gone. Rebecca tried calling her immediately. No answer. She texted. No response. At first, she assumed Lily had stayed overnight at a friend's house. But by mid-morning, something in Rebecca's instincts told her that wasn't the case. Because Lily always checked in. Always. By 11:18 a.m., Rebecca dialed 911. Officers arrived within minutes. At that point, the investigation officially began. But the most important piece of evidence in the entire case hadn't happened yet. Because nearly 30 hours later, at 10:33 p.m. on June 16th, Rebecca's phone would ring, and a voice would say something that would haunt detectives for years. She's safe. Stop looking for her. At first, investigators believed those 6 words were the mystery. They were wrong, because the real clue had nothing to do with what the caller said. It had everything to do with what could be heard behind the voice. And almost everyone missed it. By the time the sun rose on June 15th, the disappearance of 16-year-old Lily Hartwell had already begun to ripple through Cedar Ridge. At first, officers approached it as a routine missing juvenile case. Teenagers sometimes left home for a night. Sometimes they stayed with friends and forgot to tell their parents. But within the first 2 hours, that explanation began to fall apart. At 11:43 a.m., officers knocked on the door of Maya Torres. The friend Lily had texted the night before. Maya told investigators the message Lily sent at 7:18 p.m. had seemed strange. Lily rarely went anywhere without explaining why. But Maya assumed Lily had gone for a quick walk. When Lily didn't answer her phone later that night, Maya thought she had simply fallen asleep. By early afternoon, detectives began verifying Lily's last known movements. The neighbor's security camera became the first critical piece of evidence. The timestamp read 7:26 p.m. Lily steps out of the house. She pauses on the porch, adjusts the sleeves of her gray hoodie, and walks down the driveway. The footage is clear. She appears relaxed. No signs of fear. No sign of anyone forcing her. But then comes the moment investigators would replay hundreds of times. At exactly 7:28 p.m., Lily reaches the end of the driveway. She stops. She looks toward the dark stretch of Willow Street. Then she raises her hand. Not a wave, more like a signal, as if she sees someone she recognizes, someone she expects to be there. Then Lily walks out of frame. The camera captures nothing else. No vehicle headlights, no approaching figure, just an empty street. At first glance, the footage seemed almost useless. But detectives knew one thing immediately. Lily had not been taken by surprise. She walked toward someone willingly. By the evening of June 15th, the Cedar Ridge Police Department expanded the search radius to 3 miles around Willow Street. Volunteers combed through wooded trails. Search dogs followed Lily's scent for nearly half a mile before losing it near a quiet intersection called Red Pine Road. And that detail mattered, because Red Pine Road connected directly to the highway leading out of town. If someone had picked Lily up there, they could have been gone in minutes. Meanwhile, detectives began examining Lily's digital history, phone records, text messages, social media activity. The 32-second call at 7:04 p.m. quickly caught their attention. The number belonged to a 17-year-old named Connor Blake. Connor lived less than 2 miles away. He and Lily had grown up in the same neighborhood. They attended the same schools. They shared mutual friends. When detectives arrived at Connor's house the next morning, he seemed surprised but cooperative. He admitted he had called Lily that evening. But according to him, the conversation was brief and harmless. He said Lily had asked about an upcoming cross-country practice. Connor told investigators he hadn't seen her in person, and he definitely hadn't met her that night. At first, detectives had little reason to doubt him, but the timing still bothered them. That call had happened just 22 minutes before Lily walked out of her house. Still, without evidence placing Connor near Willow Street that evening, the investigation continued widening. By the afternoon of June 16th, nearly 48 hours had passed. Search teams had covered miles of terrain. Helicopters scanned forest clearings. State authorities joined the investigation, but there was still no sign of Lily Hartwell. Then came the phone call. June 16th, 10:33 p.m. Rebecca Hartwell was sitting in her living room, surrounded by 2 detectives and an FBI agent who had joined the case earlier that day. Her phone had been placed on speaker in case anyone attempted contact. At exactly 10:33 p.m., it rang. The number displayed on the screen was unfamiliar. Detective Aaron Delgado gestured for Rebecca to answer. She picked up with shaking hands. "Hello." For a moment, there was silence. Then a voice spoke. "Hello, calm, almost emotionless. She's safe. Stop looking for her. 11 seconds later, the line disconnected. Everyone in the room froze. The FBI agent immediately began tracing the call. But whoever made it had used a disposable prepaid phone. The signal bounced off multiple towers before ending somewhere along Highway 14. It was impossible to pinpoint the exact location. Within hours, the recording of the call was sent to a forensic audio lab. Investigators hoped voice analysis might identify the speaker, but early results revealed nothing conclusive. The voice was deliberately flat, almost mechanical, as if the caller were trying to disguise their natural tone. Still, detectives believed the call proved something important. Someone out there knew what happened to Lily, and more importantly, they wanted the search to stop. That single detail immediately changed the direction of the investigation. Now detectives began asking a different question. Who had the most to gain from ending the search? Connor Blake quickly returned to the center of their attention. Phone records showed Connor's personal cell had been inactive during the exact window Lily disappeared. From 7:15 p.m. until nearly 9 p.m., his phone produced no tower pings. Connor claimed he had been home playing video games. His parents confirmed he had been in his bedroom most of the night, but there was no direct proof. Then detectives discovered something that pushed their suspicions even further. At 7:31 p.m. on June 14th, 3 minutes after Lily disappeared from the camera view, Connor's phone briefly connected to a tower less than half a mile from Willow Street. When confronted with the data, Connor insisted it must have been an error. He maintained he had never left his house, but public pressure was building fast. Cedar Ridge was a small town. Rumors spread quickly, and Connor's name began appearing everywhere. Within a week, investigators obtained a warrant to search his car. Inside the trunk, forensic technicians discovered something unsettling: a single white running shoe, the same brand Lily was wearing the night she disappeared. Connor claimed he had found it near the school track earlier that week, but detectives didn't believe him. The shoe was sent for forensic testing. Meanwhile, Connor was brought in for a second round of questioning. For hours, investigators pressed him about June 14th, about the phone call, about Lily. But Connor never changed his story. He insisted he hadn't seen her, hadn't met her, had nothing to do with her disappearance. Still, the evidence was beginning to look damning. By July, prosecutors made a decision that would divide the entire town. Connor Blake was arrested, charged with the abduction of Lily Hartwell. For Rebecca Hartwell, the arrest felt like the first step toward answers. But inside the evidence files, something critical still didn't make sense. Because the mysterious call on June 16th had not come from Connor's phone. It hadn't come from any phone connected to him at all. At the time, investigators believed that didn't matter. They assumed Connor had used a disposable device. But there was one problem no one could explain. When forensic analysts finished examining the recording, they noted something unusual, something so subtle that most people would never hear it: a faint sound buried beneath the caller's voice. At first, technicians assumed it was background interference, traffic, static, maybe wind. So the report was filed away. The trial moved forward, and Connor Blake became the man everyone believed had taken Lily Hartwell. But the truth about that recording would remain hidden for nearly 8 months, until one detective decided to listen to it again and realized everyone had been listening to the wrong part of the call. For months, the case against Connor Blake looked solid. Prosecutors built their argument around timing, proximity, and the running shoe found in the trunk of his car. They presented the 32-second phone call to Lily just before she left her house. They pointed to the cell tower data, placing his phone near Willow Street minutes after she vanished. To many people in Cedar Ridge, the story felt complete. A teenage argument, a meeting in the dark, something that went wrong. By October of 2020, Connor Blake was awaiting trial. But inside the Cedar Ridge Police Department, one detective couldn't shake the feeling that something about the case didn't fit. Detective Aaron Delgado had spent nearly 20 years working missing person investigations. Experience had taught him that when a case looks simple too quickly, it usually isn't. Connor's story had remained unchanged through every interview. More importantly, there was still no physical evidence tying him directly to Lily. No DNA, no trace of her in his vehicle, no witness placing them together that night. And then there was the phone call, the 11-second message that had arrived 30 hours after Lily disappeared. She's safe. Stop looking for her. Most investigators believe the call had been Connor's attempt to mislead police. But something about the recording bothered Delgado. The voice sounded wrong, not just disguised, but almost rehearsed. Late one evening in February of 2021, Delgado reopened the audio file. He listened to it once, then again, then a third time. At first, all he heard was the same calm voice investigators had analyzed months earlier. But on the fourth playback, something else reached his attention. A faint sound beneath the words. It was subtle, so quiet that it almost blended into the background. Delgado leaned closer to the speaker and played the recording again. That's when he heard it clearly. A metallic chime, short, sharp, followed by a low mechanical rumble. The sound lasted less than a second, but it was unmistakable. Delgado had heard it somewhere before, and suddenly his blood ran cold, because that sound didn't belong to a phone line. It belonged to a train crossing signal, the kind installed at railroad intersections across Colorado. Delgado immediately checked the timing. The chime occurred exactly 3 seconds before the caller spoke, which meant wherever the call had been placed, a train crossing signal had activated nearby. This single detail changed everything, because Cedar Ridge only had one active railroad crossing within city limits, and it wasn't near Connor Blake's house. It was nearly 4 miles away, at the intersection of Red Pine Road and Old Quarry Lane, the same intersection where search dogs had lost Lily's scent 2 days after she disappeared. Suddenly, the investigation took a different direction. Delgado pulled traffic camera footage from that crossing on the night of June 16th. At 10:32 p.m., 1 minute before the phone call, a freight train passes through the intersection. The crossing arms lower. Warning bells begin ringing. Red lights flash against the dark road. And in the camera frame, one vehicle waits at the barrier. A white utility van. The timestamp moves forward. 10:33 p.m. The train finishes crossing. The barrier lifts. But the van doesn't move immediately. It remains stopped for nearly 15 seconds. Long enough for someone inside to make a phone call. When detectives enhanced the footage, they noticed something else. A company logo on the side of the van, faded, partially obscured by dirt, but still readable. Frontier Mechanical Services. The name belonged to a small HVAC repair company operating out of Cedar Ridge. Delgado requested the company's employee records immediately. The owner confirmed only 2 technicians drove company vans that summer. One of them had been working a service call outside town that night. The other technician had not clocked in. His name was Daniel Mercer, 34 years old. And until that moment, Daniel Mercer had never appeared anywhere in Lily Hartwell's investigation. But this is where everything changes. When detectives examined Mercer's phone records from June 14th, the night Lily disappeared, they discovered something chilling. At 7:27 p.m., Mercer's phone connected to the exact same tower covering Willow Street. The same tower Connor Blake's phone had briefly touched minutes later. Except Mercer lived on the opposite side of town, which meant he had no reason to be near Lily's neighborhood that evening. But there was one more connection, a quiet detail that had gone unnoticed for months. Daniel Mercer had serviced the Hartwell home 2 weeks before Lily vanished. He had repaired the air conditioning unit in the basement. Rebecca Hartwell had signed the invoice herself. That meant Mercer had been inside the house. He knew the layout. He knew Rebecca worked night shifts. And he knew Lily would often be home alone. When investigators brought Mercer in for questioning, his reaction was immediate, nervous, defensive. He insisted he had never spoken to Lily, never returned to Willow Street. But digital evidence told a different story. Cell tower data placed him near the Hartwell home the night she disappeared. And the train crossing audio from the mysterious phone call placed him at Red Pine Road when the message was delivered. When confronted with both pieces of evidence, Mercer's composure began to crack. Finally, after 6 hours of questioning, he admitted something investigators had feared since the beginning. He had called Lily that evening, using a block number, pretending to be someone she trusted, someone who needed help outside. Lily stepped out expecting a quick conversation. Instead, Mercer was waiting. What happened next would remain unclear for months. But Mercer eventually led investigators to a wooded area just beyond the railroad crossing. And for the first time since June 14th, authorities found evidence that explained what had happened to Lily Hartwell. Connor Blake was released from custody days later. Every charge dropped. The running shoe discovered in his trunk was proven unrelated, and the cell tower connection near Willow Street had been a routing anomaly, a coincidence that nearly sent an innocent teenager to prison. But the most disturbing part of the case was still the phone call, because Mercer later admitted something investigators hadn't expected. He believed the message would stop the search. He thought if Lily's family believed she was safe, the investigation might slow down. Instead, that 11-second call became the very thing that exposed him. Not because of the words, but because of the sound he never noticed. The metallic chime of a railroad crossing. A detail almost everyone ignored, except for one detective who listened a little longer. Today, the intersection at Red Pine Road looks the same as it always did. Trains still pass through in the quiet hours of the night. The crossing bells still ring, and most drivers barely notice the sound. But in the investigation of Lily Hartwell, that single noise changed everything. Because sometimes the truth in a case isn't hidden in what people say. It's hidden in what no one thought to hear. And if Detective Delgado had never replayed that recording one more time, the wrong person might still be behind bars, while the real story remained buried in the background.